The paper's due Monday, right? It's not?
They said Tuesday.
Oh, Tuesday. Well, I have a message for you from Professor Gaskill. He says, I wish my students wouldn't procrastinate and leave things to the last minute. But at least you're not as bad as the girl that called me up one year, 11 o'clock Sunday night, and she said, can you tell me a little bit about it? I said, no. So if you're listening to this from Downcasting as a podcast or getting off the ISKCON Bombay website, you're welcome to correspond with us at utahkrishnas@gmail.com. We also encourage you to take the membership class, which is available on our website at www.utahkrishnas.org. Everything is based and inspired by the teachings of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who's the founder, Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Today we want to talk about making your mountains into molehills. And before we start, we'll just tell a little joke, which may not be exactly theologically correct. A little girl was at a wedding, and she asked her mother, why is the bride wearing white? And the mother said, well, white represents happiness, so this is the happiest day of her life. She's wearing white. Little girl thought about that a little while, and then she came back to her mother and said, why is the groom wearing black? So we'll all have mountains in our life. Mountains have long represented problems to be solved, obstacles to be overcome, crosses to be borne, burdens to be carried, troubles to be triumphed over, difficulties to deal with. In our life, certainly death is a mountain, ours or others. Sickness is a mountain, family crises are mountains, addicted loved ones are mountains, unfaithful wives and unfaithful husbands are mountains. Unpaid bills are mountains. Sickness is a mountain. But in dealing with the mountains of our life, of course, we're all going to pray about them. We're all going to hope things get better. We're going to believe that things are going to improve. But I've learned you need to do more than just pray about your mountains. I've learned that you need to speak to your mountains. Not pretty please, getting down on your knees, begging that sickness, begging that financial problems, begging that marital relationship improve. No, I mean talking to your mountains. I mean commanding your mountains. I'm telling you, be removed. I'm telling you, get out of my life. I'm not begging or saying pretty please. I'm making a declaration that your days are numbered. You're finished. I'm no longer going to put up with you, and I'm not going to tolerate you. Sickness, get out. Debt, get out. We need to talk to our mountains authoritatively, emphatically, and if we don't, our mountains are going to talk to us. You know, the medical report doesn't look good. The professionals are saying that you've got to live with that disease. You're way over your head in debt. You're never going to be able to crawl out to solvency. Times are bad. We're in the middle of a recession. My business just might go under. These are all examples of your mountains talking to you. You can't listen to your mountains. You need to talk to them. And I'm not saying speak about your mountains. There's a joke that said, don't ask an old person how they are, because they'll tell you. They might have had recently an hour surgery, but they'll take 90 minutes describing it to you. Well, all that's doing is making your mountain bigger. It's acknowledging your mountain. It's letting your mountain get its foot in the door. It's magnifying your mountain and all the time draining the strength out of you. If you've ever ridden the trains in Bombay, you know what I'm talking about. If you're lucky enough to get a seat, don't make eye contact with anybody, because once you make eye contact, they've got this way of, can't I just have an inch, just a little inch between you and the next guy? Would that be too much to ask? If you give them that inch, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, of course, this is just an example about how not to let your mountain get its foot in the door. But if you do leave that little old lady an inch, before you know it, she and all her 6 kids will be in that inch, and you'll be standing up. So we don't want to give our mountains a foothold. We don't want to acknowledge their power, and we don't want them to drain us of weakness. If you've ever played baseball, Spanish work is famous for having state championship baseball teams. And once in a while you might get dusted. Pitcher might throw a ball at your head and put you in the dirt. Now, you can't dwell on that. When you get up, You can't be thinking, oh boy, I wonder what's going to happen if he throws another ball. I might get hurt and I better watch out. Nope, you can't be thinking that way. You can't be thinking about how you got down in the dust. You got to shake off the dust, get back up there, be aggressive, and say, I'm going to hit that ball out of the park. If you let that intimidate you, then you've done what you've allowed that pitcher to get leverage over you, and you've allowed him to achieve exactly what he wanted to achieve by throwing that first ball on your head. So don't focus on the mountain. They may seem immovable. They may seem permanent. In fact, when we start saying never in our life, never is a mountain word. When you start thinking about something and saying never, that probably means you're up in front of a mountain. I'm never going to get over this addiction. I've been taking this drug or substance since high school. I'm never going to lose weight. I've been on so many diets. It just doesn't seem to work. I always bounce back. My business is never going to rebound. Times are too bad. The recession's too bad. I'm never going to fulfill my dreams. There's too many obstacles. But you know what's going to turn it around? It doesn't matter what the conditions were. It doesn't matter what your history are. If you speak in your own voice to your mountains will respond to your voice. Remember that RCA commercial with the dog and the thing? He listens to his master's voice. So other people, well-wishers, friends, they may say the same things, but your mountain's not going to respond to what they say. Your mountain's going to respond, and it's not going to respond to what you think. It's going to respond to what you say out loud. It recognizes your voice. I read this story about a small church in the Smoky Mountains. They built the church and they had established a grand opening a month into the future. It was right at the base of one of the Smoky Mountains, but the building inspector came along and he said, you don't have enough parking spaces here. You need twice the parking spaces before I'm going to let you open up. Well, the preacher said, we've advertised, we've talked to God, we've got a date, and I think we should stick to it. And so he called a meeting. There were 300 members of the congregation. He called a faith meeting. And they got all down on their knees and they prayed, Lord, move the mountain. It says in the Bible, you move mountains. So we're down on our knees and we're going to pray. Of course, not all 300 members of the congregation showed up, only 24. But as ridiculous as it might seem, those 24 people were down on their knees praying to move the mountains. Some more time went by. It was 3 weeks to the opening, 2 weeks to the opening. One morning, the pastor's in his office, and a rough-looking big guy with a hard hat comes in the room. And he says, Pastor, I'm sorry for the intrusion, but I'm from the Acme Construction Company in the next town. We're building a shopping mall, and we're 100 tons of fill short of what we need. Is there any way that we could buy that mountain out of back? He says, we're out of time. We're facing a deadline. He says, if you give the word, we'll be out here tomorrow with the backhoe loaders and the dump trucks, and we'll get that mountain out of your way in a second. And he said, what's more, once we pull out that mountain into the parking lot, we got to wait a week or so for it to settle. So while we're cooling our heels for that week, I had an idea. What if we come in with our pavers, our asphalt, and all our laborers and give you twice the amount of parking space in your parking lot? He said, Pastor, would that be okay? He said, yeah, that would be okay. Anyway, the next time that church, small congregation, faced a mountain, and the preacher called for a faith meeting, all 300 members of the congregation showed up. When we speak to our mountain, the change may not happen overnight. It may not even happen in 10 days or 2 weeks. But the moment that you speak to your mountains, Krishna, which is our name for God, He begins in the unseen world to release favor. He moves the wrong people out of the way, sends the right people, sends healing, arranges breakthroughs, sends victory. If you keep speaking to your mountain in faith, that mountain will be removed in due course of time. We have a practice called Sankirtan, which means addressing our mountains in the name of the Lord. Guns and weapons and swords, these are natural weapons. But we have a supernatural weapon. It's called the name of the Lord. When you address your mountain, mountain, in the name of the Lord, be removed. Sickness, in the name of the Lord, be removed. Debt, in the name of the Lord, be removed. In the name of the Lord, let my wayward teenage son stop hanging out with the wrong crowd. Send the right people across his path. In the name of the Lord, that's a supernatural power. And in the unseen world, doors begin to open. Things begin to arrange themselves in such a way as to end up in your way. This is a story about a great devotee of Krishna named Dhruva Maharaj. And at one point in time, he was fighting a ghostly, demoniac race of beings called the Yakshas. And I'll just read a little bit here for you. From the Srimad Bhagavatam. Dhruva Maharaj was completely covered by an incessant shower of arrows, just as a mountain is covered by incessant rainfall. Here, Dhruva Maharaj is compared to the sun and the great assembly of Yakshas to foggy mist. Fog is insignificant in comparison with the sun. Reading on here, next a huge mountain fell from the sky. From all sides rained hailstones, lances, clubs, swords, and enormous chunks of stone. Dhruva saw groups of mad elephants, lions, tigers, large angry-eyed serpents vomiting fire, all coming to devour him. Finally, as if the end of the universe were at hand, a fierce ocean with foaming waves and great roaring sounds came rushing to him. Doesn't sound good, does it? How's he going to get out of that one? Well, here's the answer. Dhruva Maharaj then took up a special arrow made by Lord Krishna himself. As soon as Dhruva joined this arrow to the bow and empowered it with the Hare Krishna mantra, the mountain created by the Yakshas disappeared. You know, in the times that we're talking about 5,000 years ago, guns weren't considered very powerful or very accurate weapons. And we think of bows and arrows as being kind of primitive. But in those days, the warriors, they knew the use of guiding arrows by mantra. They could put a little teaspoon of water in the palm of their hand. They would say a mantra into that water. They would fit the arrow to their bow. And they could target a single enemy standing in a crowd of 1,000 people. And some of those mantra-empowered arrows had nuclear capabilities. We read about all this in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Dhruva Maharaj, he had an arrow given to him by Krishna, and he empowered it with sound vibration. Let's not underestimate the power of sound. Have you ever heard of Om? Ever heard of that? Om. They say that our Amen comes from that. That if you go back and far enough, Amen or Amen was Omen, and if you go back further, it was Om. That's the seed from which the entire universe comes. It's a sound that God makes when He wants to create the universe. And from that seed, the entire universe generates itself. Sound is the most subtle of all material elements. And after God says this, the Omkar, the sound vibration, then you get the next most subtle element, which is air, followed by the next most subtle element, which is fire, followed by the next most subtle element, which is water, followed by the grossest element, which is earth. And voila, you have, beginning from sound, a seed of sound, you have this phenomenal world. You have a universe. Sound is the beginning of creation, and when it's time to destroy, there'll also be sound. And that's why the Vedic mantras generally begin and end with Om. Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sarabhasanti Suryo Om Asado Mad Sadgamya Om Tamasho Madjotigamya Om Ritamanamina Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sound can create and sound can destroy. When God wanted to create, according to the Christian Bible, He said, let there be creation. He didn't need anything else. Imagine a single tree. If you wanted to put leaves on a single tree, imagine how long it would take you. Right? Gluing each and every leaf on the tree. God just says, let there be creation. And not only one tree, but millions and millions of trees. He says, let there be spring. And everything obeys His command. He doesn't have to engineer it. He doesn't have to worry about each bit and piece of it. He just commands everything to come into being by sound. And when it's time for annihilation, He commands everything to be destroyed by sound. That's all you need. That's the beginning and the middle and the end is sound. In about 1993, we started talking about a temple in Spanish Fork, Utah. We started talking it up, and we got enthusiastically excited about it. We started talking to other people with resources and potential donors. And what we were doing was we were creating this temple in sound. We were creating it on a subtle level. And when we got a few more donations and resources, we translated that sound into architectural drawings and blueprints. And then when we got a few more donations, we translated into mortar and stucco and domes and columns. And eventually, this temple, which was originally manifested in sound, became manifested in the physical world. So it is sound by which God creates and destroys. And it is through the invocation of the Hare Krishna mantra that we speak to and destroy our mountains. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The absolute truth and his name are non-different. In the relative world, the name of an entity and the entity are different. I could say water, 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 and I'd still be thirsty, because the name water and the substance are different. But wherever you take a bona fide name of God, it doesn't have to be Krishna. Krishna is a name much preferred by great saints and sages of India because it means all attractive. And so whether another name of God refers to his beauty or his fame or his wealth, at the end of the day, he's Krishna, or all attractive. But if you have another name of God, that's fine. The principle is this, that if you say the name of God, you will be personally associating with the Lord. He will be dancing on the tip of your tongue. And so Dhruva Maharaj, even though he was covered by darkness, the black magic of the yakshas, snakes and elephants and chunks of rock and roaring ocean, it didn't seem like he could come out of it. It seemed like he was covered and overwhelmed by the forces of darkness. But he spoke light into the darkness. He fitted an arrow in his bow and he said, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. And I'll tell you something, never in the history of the world has darkness stood against light. In fact, there is no such thing as darkness as a separate, independent entity. Darkness only means the absence of light. Wherever there's light, there can be no darkness. Wherever there's God and wherever there's the holy name of God, there can be no darkness. So however overwhelming that mountain, which is sitting right on the top of Dhruva seemed, all he had to do was speak God's name. Command that mountain in the name of God be removed. And that mountain dissipated just as thoroughly as the fog dissipates underneath the rays of the sun. When we speak against our mountains or speak to our mountains in the name of the Lord, that prayer rises to heaven just like the fragrant smoke of the incense rises above. And he takes your call. It's not our prayer. It's not anything we can say. It's not anything we can do. But it's he who hears our prayer who can remove the mountains. And it doesn't matter, why would God take my prayer? You don't know who I am. You don't know how I've done. I'm so insignificant. No, to him you are a jewel. To God you are amazing. A CEO, a prime minister, a premier, there may be many, many calls he doesn't take. He might be in a parliamentary meeting. He might be meeting with his cabinet. So he says, I can't take any calls. Stop all calls. But even in the midst of that, if his young son or 6-year-old daughter calls, he'll take that call. Doesn't matter how important the meeting is. Doesn't matter who he's closeted with. If the name of his son or daughter comes across that caller ID, and it doesn't matter how insignificant or frivolous, might say, Dad, can you bring me home some tater tots? When the parliament meeting is over. He takes it as very, very important because of love. Because of love. So your call, the things that concern you, the mountains that are facing you, when you talk to your mountains in the name of the Lord, he hears that call and he responds. Once there was a child playing in a sandbox and he uncovered this big boulder, and he was just a little child. And he thought he would eject the boulder from the sandbox. So he started rolling it over, took all of his little strength and all of his little arms and all of his little legs to push it. And he came to the edge, the sort of a lip of a sandbox. And he tries to lift it up and it falls back. And he tries to lift it up. And then with his last grasp, he tries to lift it up. And not only does it fall back, but it smashes his finger. He's crying in the sandlot. Shadow comes over him. Looks up, it's his dad. Said, son, why didn't you use all the resources available to you to eject that rock from the sandbox? He was crying, Dad, I did everything. I'm at the end of my strength and my fingers smashed. What do you mean I didn't use all my resources? Dad said, you could have done one more thing. You could have asked me. You could have asked me. So have you spoken to your mountain with faith in the name of the Lord? 5,000 years ago, if you're Christian, you believe that Jesus Christ appeared. He was on the planet for 32 years. Our information is that God himself appeared 5,000 years ago in India. He was on the planet for 125 years. Now, in the 7th year of his manifested pastimes, Indra, the Lord of heavens and the master of rainfall, became irked from something that Krishna did. And Indra was so provoked by Krishna that he invoked what are called the Shambhartaka clouds. These clouds are usually held in reserve and only invoked at the devastation of the universe. So Indra wanted to teach Krishna a lesson, and he invoked these clouds, as you see in this picture, and they started raining, and raining, and raining. And it got freezing cold. And there was ice, and there was howling hurricane velocity winds, and the water within minutes was rising all over, and all the cows and all the inhabitants of this simple village in India were in danger. They knew they couldn't do anything about the situation. They knew they were powerless. So they immediately used every means at their disposal, and they said, Krishna, Krishna, save us. And Krishna came, and he surveyed the situation. There's a mountain there called Govardhan. In fact, just last Thursday, we celebrated the anniversary of Krishna's lifting Govardhan Hill. The hill itself, if you wanted to walk around it, it's 25 kilometers or 15 miles. On the anniversary of Krishna's lifting Govardhan Hill 5,000 years ago, tens of thousands of people from Delhi and all over northern India, they come to Govardhan and they consider that they destroy their sins by walking the 15 miles around Govardhan Hill. What Krishna did, he not only lifted the hill, but he held it aloof for 7 days on his pinky of his left hand. And he invited all the cows and the cowherd people, come in here and be warm and dry, and be well fed. Krishna lifted a mountain as if it were a ball of cotton, as if it were a mushroom, and used it as shelter. Now, you may think, well, that sounds pretty fantastic. That sounds pretty unbelievable. It is not in the least bit unbelievable. It is not the least bit fantastic. Think of all the planets that God is floating in space like little wisps of cotton. Does not this one planet alone contain mountains, the Urals, the Himalayas? And in addition to mountains, are there not big forests and oceans? How many millions of tons does this planet weigh? And yet God is floating it in space. He's floating it as if it were weightless in space. Not only this planet, but millions of planets and millions and millions and millions of universes. So what's the big deal? He lifted a little mountain and held it there for seven days. Another thing to consider is if you have a mountain before you and you think, I can handle it, I can do it, I got myself into this mess, I'll get myself out of this mess. When you're relying on yourself and material means at your disposal, there's only a couple of possibilities, and none of them are really exciting. But God is the God of possibilities. Consider that once there was just darkness, there was nothing, and from nothing, God brought out all the millions and millions of universes with the sunsets and the seasonal changes. Each and every individual is a unique, jewel-like individual, unlike any other individual in the world. Every one of you is handcrafted. Every one of you is full of unlimited possibilities, and you come from the Lord of unlimited possibilities. So when you have a mountain in front of you, and you want to deal with that mountain, if you include God of unlimited possibilities in the equation, then an unlimited number of outcomes can be there. People ask us about this temple. There are three things that attract people to this temple. First is the temple itself. It's the only Rajasthani-style building in North America. It's unique. It's beautiful, if I may say so. The second reason that people are attracted to this temple is that it stands on a nice hill which overlooks South Utah County. So the beauty of the temple, the location of the temple. The third thing that attracts people is, what is it doing here in Mormon country? This seems to be an unlikely place for a full-fledged Krishna Hindu temple. So a lot of people come through the door and they say, they're like they've got this burning question. How did you get here? They might come from Milwaukee or Dallas, Texas, or New Orleans. How did you get here? So I say, look at God. Just look at Him. Look at Him. He's not an old man. He's supreme. There's no power greater than Him that would ever make Him age. So He's ever youthful. He stands in a cocky, threefold bending form. He's got his flute in one hand. He's got a peacock feather jauntily in his hair. He's got a mischievous look in his eye. I say, our God is a God who loves to play pranks. He put this temple as a prank. It's impossible that a Christian temple, not because of anything to do with Mormonism. In fact, the Mormons are one of the reasons how nice they are, how neighborly, how pious. They're one of the reasons why the impossible has become possible. But from a research point of view, it's absolutely impossible to plant the seed of a Krishna temple in an area that's 90% Mormon. That goes against all... There are books, how to plant a church, and it contravenes every single rule of how to plant a church. Don't go to an area where 90% of the people are committed to another religion. Rule number one, you know? So how did it happen? Because God can make the impossible possible because He is the God of possibilities. Unlimited possibilities. Here's a verse from the Vedas, from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Vedic sound, and the Vedas are vast literatures which are written originally in Sanskrit by Vyasadeva, and they cover not only spiritual but material subject matters as well, and 90% of them are lost to us. They're no longer available to us. But not to worry. It says here, Vedic sounds comprehend all vital energies within the universe, and they're thus undivided by time and space. Vedic sound vibration is so subtle, unfathomable, and deep that only the Lord and His empowered followers can understand its actual form and meaning. Not to worry. The 16 words of the Hare Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, contain all the meanings and all the imports of all the Vedas. And simply by chanting these 16 words, names of God, all your mountains are destroyed. Maybe not overnight, maybe not immediately. We've had the experience that when you pull the plug out of the fan doesn't stop dead. It continues spinning, but all the source of its energy is stopped, and it's going to wind down to a stop. Or when you no longer put fuel on the fire may burn for some time, but eventually it's going to run out of fuel and come to an end. Similarly, when one begins to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, the mountain of illusion, the mountain of suffering, whatever form it may take, is destroyed. In fact, this whole material world is temporary and we're eternal. And the mountain, which each and every one of us have more or less voluntarily assumed, is to identify with this material world. If you have a friend who looks like they're depressed and you want to go and empathize with them, you go and you put your arm over their shoulder and you say, what's your name?
Zoe.
Huh? Zoe. Okay, you say, Zoe, what's the matter? Right? What's the matter? Well, you just nailed it. If we hadn't associated with matter in the first place, we wouldn't have mountains facing us. So when you chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, you penetrate the darkness of ignorance, of identifying with this material body, certain family, certain race, certain country. You penetrate with the light of transcendental knowledge. And in due course of time, as you pull the plug out of the fan, one will come to see oneself not as this body, or black or white, or male or female, or short or tall, or fat or skinny, or blue-eyed or brown-eyed, or blonde-eyed, or Christian, Hindu, Muslim, or Jew. The mountain of ignorance will be destroyed, and one will see oneself for an eternal spirit soul, part and parcel of God. And know that it is because of forgetfulness of God, it is because we've been shrouded in the darkness of forgetfulness of God, that our sojourn in this material world is perpetuated. Birth after birth after birth after birth after birth after birth. And it is the recollection of the holy names of God which, like a thunderbolt, smashes that mountain of ignorance and qualifies us to go back home, back to Godhead. Our principal practices, you've already experienced one when you came in, is the kirtan, the chanting with the harmonium and the musical instruments. We also carry with us a bag of beads around our neck. Inside that bag are called japa beads. There are 108 beads in each string. And we chant as an individual private meditation, generally in the morning hours, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. There are 108 beads on each string, and we say one mantra for each bead. So when you've done 108 recitations, that's one round. And devotees take vows. I'll chant 1 round a day, 4 rounds a day, 10 rounds a day, 16 rounds a day, whatsoever. Now, when you chant the names of the Lord in a regular scheduled measurement, it awakens the knowledge of who we really are. Let's say, for example, you had a friend when you were a child and your family moved away and you've lost touch for years and years, and one day you get a phone call. It's Jim. Well, Jim who? Jim from Boston. Don't you remember when we were 5 or 6 or 7 years old, we used to skateboard and steal rides in the MTA? Then it begins to come back. So we have an original relationship with God which has been covered over. We think we may have forgotten or lost it, but it's there. It just needs the right connection, the right sound vibration, and we revive our original primeval relationship with God. Now, sound, as I mentioned, is the most subtle of all material elements, so it's next door neighbor of the soul. If you get the right sound vibrations from Scripture and from pure realized devotees of the Lord, you're going to be living in the world that ought to be. Have you ever been frustrated by the way people act, the way people treat you, or the way things turn out in this world, and you wished it were better? Have you ever said, it ought to be like this, or she ought to be like that, or he ought to be like that? Have you ever said that? Well, if you want things to be as they ought to be, you're in the wrong place. You're in the broken material world. You're in the world where souls go who forget God. But if you want to reinstate yourself in the world that ought to be, then expose yourself to transcendental sound vibration from Scriptures and from pure devotees. First time I met Prabhupada was in Australia in 1970. He came from Moscow. He was traveling the world, establishing temples, and at the same time translating his books. He stayed in Australia for 4 days. And he talked about the spiritual world with confidence and with experience. Now, if I tell you that every so often I go to Macy's in Spanish Fork, I go out the drive, I go through the white gate, I turn right, I go to the stop sign, I go left, I go 2.5 miles, past the Chevron station, past Cow Ranch, past Chase Bank, I take a right, I go 1.5 blocks, and I turn left and I'm in the Macy's parking lot. And when I go into Macy's, they have the bulk section here with all the case lots, they have the bargains over here, they have the deli over here, they have the breads here, they have the dairy and the fruit. Do you doubt me? Do you doubt me? I mean, I'm talking with conviction and experience. Prabhupada talked about the spiritual world in the same way. And when we connected with that pure, free from defect sound vibration, we also got confidence that, no, I'm not this body. This material world is not my home, and I'm not made for misery and suffering, and all my mountains can be destroyed if I simply invoke the name of God and revive my original primordial relationship with Him. And the beautiful thing is, He wants us back more than we want to go. So as soon as we indicate a willingness, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, He begins to move things in the unseen world in such a way as to extract us ultimately from this world of birth and death. Here it is said, the sound vibration of the Hare Krishna mantra, although presented in the ordinary alphabet, should not be taken as mundane or material. When the mind is completely washed of all material contamination, the pure consciousness acts. Pure devotees of the Lord can reveal the spiritual world by their transcendental sound vibration, making it possible for even a neophyte devotee to experience the Lord's abode. It says that we souls in the material world have become so involved with our erroneous ways that it is as if our hearts have become buried in a gloomy mountain of sinful desire. The lotus feet of the Lord, however, like brilliant thunderbolts, it can shatter these mountains and illuminate our true consciousness. And bottom line, let's just say for argument's sake that our faith doesn't necessarily change the outer landscape. God is well capable, He's well able to do it. But let's just say for argument's sake that our faith doesn't change the outer landscape. It's always going to change the inner landscape. And if the inner landscape is changed, it doesn't matter what the outer landscape pretends. Let's say you're walking up a mountain barefooted, there are all kinds of sharp pebbles and thorns which cause you misery and inconvenience. Let's say you're not able to change the mountain. But if you put on a good pair of shoes, You can walk anywhere you want in the mountain with any inconvenience. So by taking the name, by associating daily with the Lord and in His fullness, in the form of His holy name, one actually comes to the point where one really doesn't care what the outer landscape is. One girds oneself, one fortifies one with contentment. Just like a person on a mountain is free from suffering if they've simply got a good pair of shoes. When you face difficulty, don't complain. Start speaking light into the situation. God knows how to get you where you need to go. And faith is what moves the Lord. When you speak favor, that's what activates God. Is there a mountain in your life keeping you from your best? My challenge is that you've prayed, you've believed, you've hoped, but now start speaking to your mountain. Your mountain will respond to your voice. There's nothing more powerful than you declaring victory over your life. Some of you have talked about the mountain long enough. You need to start talking to the mountain. If you rise up and say to the sickness, be gone. Say to the strife, be gone. Say to the depression, be removed. Krishna will turn your mountains into molehills. You will remove obstacles that looked immovable, and you will accomplish dreams that seemed impossible. And if you're so inclined, please chant with me. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.